Hi, this is Kate Napolitano, and you're listening to So Booking Cool with Jewel B.
Welcome to So Booking Cool. It's Jewel B. I'm truly thrilled about today's guest. She's a senior editor at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. She's joining us today. She is Kate Napolitano.
Hello, hi. Thank you so much for having me, Jewel. I'm so excited to come on to the show and talk books. It's my favorite thing to do.
Of course, Kate, it's such a pleasure. We're going to be learning so much about you today and about the world of publishing and editing. You know, I have to get started by asking what first drew you to wanting to become an editor, and just like give a background on the types of books that you love to edit and have edited throughout your career. Because how long have you been in the industry again?
It's almost 10 years. It'll be 10 years in May, which
Wow.
is crazy. It's flown by.
That is amazing. Almost a decade. Ooh, yeah.
Yes. I started in publishing 2 weeks before I graduated college, actually. I landed my first ed assistant job at Plume Books, and I had graduated in 2009, and there was just, complete absence of jobs in the economy generally, and particularly in the publishing industry and in editorial. So when the opportunity at Plume had opened up, I really jumped at it. So I took off for my graduation and have been in the publishing industry ever since. Just moving forward, buying up all types of books, acquiring books, editing them. But in terms of how I got word of the publishing industry as a feasible option, it wasn't something that necessarily was, I didn't go to college with the intention of joining the publishing industry. It was something that came to me over time. I was a literature major, and I also I double minored in sociology and women and gender studies, which has over time really influenced the types of books that I've eventually worked on. But I thought I was going to be a teacher, which I have all respect for. Teacher, I come from a family of teachers, but it just over time I realized that I could potentially use my my talents in a different direction. And I had a professor who was publishing a book at a university press, and I was in his office for office hours debating a topic that I could write a paper on. And he kind of just was like, "What are you doing with your life?" And then he was like, "Why don't you work in the publishing world?" And it kind of opened up something to me. It was just something that did not feel accessible to me at that point, but it kind of sparked something within me that I could work with the books. I loved literature so much, but actually being able to be on the ground and work with writers made so much sense to me. So I landed an internship at Rutgers University Press, and then I moved over to intern at Viking as part of the Penguin Random House umbrella, and that's when really I understood the contours of the job with greater clarity, because the publishing world feels like it's a bit opaque. There's not quite, there's the idea that if you're an editor, you're just sitting at your desk reading all day, and that's not quite what the job was. So getting the internships and the experience helped to really clarify what the industry looked like, and I just caught the bug really early, and I knew that I wanted to be in it. So I jumped at the opportunity to be an assistant at Plume, and I started acquiring books rather quickly there. Usually you as an assistant, you are working with a few different editors, and then you're developing your own taste alongside them. And that period of time, in the first 2 years I was working there, is when I started to understand. I went into the industry thinking I'd work on fiction because I studied literature in college, and I had great aspirations to find the next David Foster Wallace, but I also realized I always loved trend spotting, and nonfiction opened up to me. I realized that there was a space that I loved being in, and so I kind of pivoted and then have built a list over time in the nonfiction space, primarily working on humor, pop culture, memoir, and narrative nonfiction that is somewhat all, I would say, bound by an interest in culture, so that can manifest in highbrow, lowbrow sort of examination of culture, how trends pop off, what makes people tick, all those elements of sociology that I was so drawn to in college have been able to be refracted through the list of books that I've developed over time, which is a gift. It's such an honor to work in this industry and to pursue editing and acquiring and working with writers who have the types of books that I'd want to read as a consumer as well.
Okay, that was extremely insightful, Kate.
A lot of detail,
Yeah.
maybe more detail than you need to know.
No, that's great. The more detailed, the better. You know, do you like that your professor had that conversation with you during office hours about like maybe you should consider working in publishing? Like, are you grateful for the conversation, or how did you
Well,
feel?
I have to say that this professor, I actually went in there to argue about a paper, so I went in there with like a completely different tone. Like I was positing I wanted to write a paper about the ways in which men and women negotiate space at punk and hardcore shows. I had a very like strong agenda that I wanted to cover this, and he just didn't think it was a concept that was appealing enough. And ironically, like down the line, I'm now working on a book that is looking at the punk scene during that era. So I feel like I'm still being able to pursue that paper in a different sort of realm. But when he said that to me, it did feel like a light switch turned on. I just had never considered that aspect. I went to a state school, the College of New Jersey, which provided me with a great education and had a really wonderful and supportive literature department, but it just like there weren't people that I knew in the industry. It wasn't quite it just didn't feel accessible to me. But I feel like and also publishing tends to be a pretty like Ivy League heavy industry, historically speaking, seems to have picked up people from a certain type of socioeconomic strata as well. So it was something that when I was able to break in, I felt very grateful for the ability to do that. And then when I was able to settle in, I was like, okay, now I'm in this industry, and I'm happy to be here, and I'm able to provide a perspective that's perhaps like slightly outside the norm, which makes me feel like that's what we should be doing as book editors.
Right. And speaking of editing, when you edit books, Kate, how are you thinking? Do you have the mindset of a consumer, or do you leave that up to other departments like publicity, marketing, or sales?
That's a great question. I personally believe that we live in such a noisy media environment right now, and our attention spans are so truncated, and there's so many things that you could be reading, whether it's on your phone or on a computer, books, listen to podcasts, so many ways you can consume media. So to me, it's always been a driving point that you have to think about the consumer, you have to think about the reader, and that has always been something that I consider in the acquisition process. I want to think about who the readership for a book is. I try to like envision who a reader would be for a book, and I think that has helped me, particularly with the types of books that I've worked on. Like identifying a demographic, I think, is a very important thing to be able to pinpoint. It also makes it easier for those other departments once you acquire a book, marketing and sales and publicity, if you can go in there as an editor and say, hey, like this is the type of book that we'll be publishing, and here's like a targeted audience who we know will come to this book. Perhaps we can expand it beyond that, but like thinking about where a book sits in a bookstore, thinking about who's picking up the book, I feel like that's a really important part because, like, again, books are like it's a very like special experience. Reading, like the idea of picking up a book is like something that feels so like, but I put so much value on it. It feels like an awesome responsibility to be able to bring books into the world. So I want to make sure that they're being brought in with the most support possible.
And what does that support look like, just out of curiosity?
So when an editor is undergoing the process to acquire a book, there's a few different steps in that process. Usually you're competing against other editors at other publishing houses to try to acquire this book. And so the most important thing, I think, going into that type of conversation where you're going to be speaking to an author is showing that you understand their book, you just jive in terms of editorial connection, but that you also demonstrate that you're thinking about their book very holistically, and that means thinking about marketing, thinking about sales, thinking about publicity, and also at the same time getting your team really excited about a book and helping them to understand the author's vision and your vision, and everyone essentially then coming on board with a shared vision of how to publish a book effectively. I think it's so important to be in lockstep with your team, to have that enthusiasm before the book is even like written at that point. Being able to harness that energy internally in a company, I think is so very valuable. And I think that comes down to the editor being able to effectively communicate the goals for the book, and also just like get people excited about it. If you can't get your colleagues excited about a book, like how are you going to get readers excited about it? It's really important to make sure that you're thinking about those things as you're publishing, just in terms of just being strategic, but also thinking about what a reader would want from it as well.
And again, I definitely noticed that it seems like you have such like an eye on a pulse. Like, for example, you've edited many notable books and books that have gone on to become New York Times bestsellers, including Don't Touch My Hair by Phoebe Robinson. Yes, I know a lot of you listeners, I know you know who Phoebe Robinson is. So how did you know that this book was going to be a hit with people and that it was going to resonate?
That's a great question. And I really feel like there's something that comes into play when I'm evaluating a book. I enjoy the trend spotting aspect of the job, as I mentioned earlier. I find that in order to be an effective editor in the space that I work in, you should be thinking about what's coming in terms of trends and what's coming in terms of cultural conversation, rather than trying to publish into a moment, because books are inherently a long burn process. After you sign a contract, it can take anywhere from 8 months to a year, generally speaking, perhaps longer, to get a book out into the world. So you're trying to anticipate a cultural moment, which is tough to do. But I think that it's really important to have your ear to the ground and to realize what people are talking about, and also doing that outside of the New York bubble, which we can fall trap to. We're all working like in a media industry, and so sometimes that can be essentially a sort of echo chamber. So I like to be aware of what's going on, just like generally culturally, and that helps me keep my finger on the pulse. And in terms of Phoebe's book, I also enjoy just especially in the pop culture and comedy space, I always like that sort of like scouting aspect of the job. So she was someone that I was aware of, and I had her on a short list of people I wanted to reach out to. I was just waiting at the right point of her career. And this was before her podcasts were developed, before, yes, this was years and years ago. And as it was, her agent reached out to me and was like, would you be interested in reading this? And as soon as it landed with me, I just like, yes. I knew that she was speaking on topics in a way that was so incredibly unique. She had a way of taking culture and bringing it down to the level of the personal, and I think that's a very hard thing to do, like to blend personal and political in a way that feels accessible to the reader. That really energized me, and I felt like such a buzziness when I had it. Like when I have a proposal in that I feel it in my gut. I like literally would get out of my office and like pace back and forth, being like, how can I get this book? Like strategizing, and luckily I was able to get my team on board with the thought that this is at that point someone who was unknown, and that someone who was still breaking her way into comedy, but that I felt like in my gut would be someone who would be incredibly successful and had a book that was very timely. I mean, this was before we published into the 2016 political climate, which, I mean, it's not like lucky that we did that, because that's the state of the world that we were in, but that timing happened to be very fortunate. So we had a lot of fortunate for the publishing process, because we had a lot of momentum going into it, knowing that this book was unlike anything else that was out there, and that felt really special. It was a very special publishing experience, and it was the type of all hands on deck publishing experience where my marketing team, publicity, sales, everyone was on board, and it all came together beautifully. And that's like, those are the best types of moments in the industry, when you're able to like harness all that energy, when you know you have something and you know readers will love it, and then it does affect readers in that way. And it's honestly one of the joys of the job.
Do you ever get feedback from readers who write? Like, is it often that readers will reach out to the book's editor and express how much they really love and appreciate that book?
I wish it would happen more often. But kind of like, it's like behind the scenes. I definitely have had people reach out before and find me like via Instagram. That's happened before. But I think that to me, like, I don't need to be the star of the show. I like hearing from readers. My mom's a librarian, so I feel like I'm imbued with a sense of like just natural enthusiasm for talking about books. So I love getting feedback from readers. The times that have been most illustrative to me of a reader's enthusiasm is when I've been on the subway and seen someone reading a book that I've edited, because I can't help but just be like, hey, are you liking that book? If they look like they're like especially if like you see someone who's like laughing while they're reading a book that you edited, and you feel like $1,000,000 doing that. So yes, everyone feel free to reach out to editors, let them know that they're doing great work, because we work really hard to get books out there, and I'm always about like propping up creatives generally, but generally speaking, it's been wonderful just to see the type of feedback that I have about the books that I've worked on, because I believe in books, and I believe that books can change people's lives, and that's like just again like a very awesome responsibility that I am able to help shepherd these books into the world.
Yes, and even so, what also speaks to the work that you've done. In 2016, you were among Publishers Weekly Star Watch honorees, and I remember reading the different editors who were honored, but I focused on yours, and one of the goals that was listed in the article was, and I quote, "You want to find authors with whom you could identify with. Young, eager, savvy cultural commentators who aren't afraid to shake things up." And you also had a goal to prove to everyone that millennials do indeed buy books. Are these still goals that you have, and what are some others that are also important to you, and why?
Thank you for also digging up that quote. I'm glad I made a very strong stance with this, because I still do believe these things. They're essentially the guiding principles of my job. I am always seeking out writers who exist outside of a mainstream perspective. I think that's really important to make sure that you are finding writers who aren't afraid to push culture into different directions, and that, again, manifests in a variety of different ways and different types of writing. I think that the idea that writers can shape a cultural conversation is something that I really value. So I am always on the hunt for writers that I think are providing a new perspective or shedding new light on a cultural topic. And I've always been trying to prove that millennials buy books. When I started working in publishing, there was a sort of like sense that my age range wasn't reading, which was so disheartening to me, because everyone I knew was reading. And also, we are now in an era where we see that the millennial demographic is actually reading more, and we're reading more physical books than ever before, which is great and really, really hopeful for me. I think that it's so important we need to publish books for all different types of readers, and that means involving a lot of different perspectives. Again, publishing has been historically like very white, straight, female, of a very particular socioeconomic class, generally speaking, and that I think we're having really important conversations about how these things can shift, and I feel like in order to be effective publishers, we have to think about how to get voices out into the world that is not just like a homogenous sort of publishing experience. We should be publishing for all types of readers, and that's something that kind of undergirds everything that I do, is making sure that the books that I publish are, pushing perspectives that maybe haven't been reflected within the publishing world as much as possible. I come from a kind of like a punk background, and that has always been like push culture, question culture, work with people who work with creatives who take risks and who work really hard, who have great work ethic, and I've been really lucky to work with writers who do that.
Yeah, I want to also know, who are some of the other authors that you are really proud to have worked with?
Oh, that's such a tough question, because I feel like I say this often, but I feel like the books I edit are like my children. Like, I don't like to pick favorites, because every book that I've been very lucky that the books that I've acquired and the authors that I have been lucky enough to work with have all provided such insight into the editorial experience and just challenge me as an editor. And so it's hard to pick just one. I will say that I have a few projects upcoming that I'm really excited about that I think kind of demonstrate the breadth of my list. I'm working with a writer. Her name is Anne Helen Peterson. She and I have actually worked together on 2 previous books. The last book was Too Fat, Too Slutty, Too Loud, The Rise and Reign of the Unruly Woman, which is my favorite title to say in front of an all old white man's sales force. But Anne's writing a new book, which I'm so incredibly excited about. It's called Can't Even. And it's looking at the millennial burnout sensation. She wrote an article for BuzzFeed. She's a long-form culture journalist at BuzzFeed, former academic turned journalist, and she's writing about this phenomenon of extreme burnout that is particularly affecting this demographic, this age range that grew up in this post 9/11 era where we have all the promises of the American dreams ahead of us, but that's not what our culture looks like anymore. So it's essentially a cultural critique. It's a capitalist critique. It's looking at the mental health related to the generation of people around me who are working all the time and feeling like they're on a treadmill and don't necessarily have things to show for it. I think that when she wrote that article, it hit such a nerve in so many people. It was read by, I believe, 5 million people within the first week or so that it went up.
It's amazing.
It just struck a nerve. Yeah, she's also just such a gifted writer. She has a really wonderful way of being able to assess very macro structural problems, but also bring it down to the level of accessibility. She's a very almost a sneaky way of being able to couch theory into cultural conversation in a way that I think pushes the reader and makes for an engaging read, but that one that also has serious heft behind it. So I'm really excited for that book. I'm working with 2 great humorists that I'm really, really excited about. One, Cazzie David, is writing about living in the age of social media anxiety. She has such a knack for timing. She just makes me laugh out loud. Every draft that she's sending over is fantastic. I'm also working with a young comedian on the up and up, Quinta Brunson. Quinta is just able to layer a pop culture reference in a way that just guts me. I love being able to work with writers who make me laugh out loud as I'm editing them, because it feels like, oh, hey, this is my job. What a cool thing that I'm able to work on books that really bring light into my day, and will do so for readers. So really thrilled about that. And I have a really exciting project. I can't tell. I'm going to do a weird teaser, but I have a very exciting project upcoming from someone who is, I would say, a foremost leader of the civil rights activism of our era, and I can't wait to talk about that book and be a hype beast for it everywhere possible. But I'm going to be very mysterious about it at this point. But very exciting things to come for that. I'm thrilled about the list I've been able to develop over time, and the team at HMH has been very supportive of my taste, and so I've been able to pick up quite a few writers in my year and a half of being at this company that I think I have a lot of very exciting projects ahead that I'm thrilled to talk about.
Wow, there's a lot to look forward there. I know all of those books are just going to be so good.
Oh, thank you.
I can tell. Yeah, no problem.
That's lovely.
Yeah, I can just feel it. You have such a knack and everything.
Thanks. I really enjoy that aspect. It brings me so much happiness to be able to work with writers that I think can get when their books are in the hands of readers, it'll change them in some way, whether it makes them laugh, it makes them think about culture differently. It just is something that feels like home to them in a way that is grounding. Every writer that I work with has a way of reaching a reader in a way that it feels like such a privilege for me, and I'm thrilled to be able to be in the job. It really does feel like a privilege to be able to kind of shape culture in that way.
Are there any books or writers that have changed your life?
Oh, yeah, totally. Off the top of my head, I would say Kurt Vonnegut I studied very intently in college. I took a course where I read every Kurt Vonnegut work, and the book Breakfast of Champions always really resonated with me because of the way in which it talked about how language and truth could be manipulated, and that has always been something. I've been a fan of like postmodern theory generally, and that book kind of opened my eyes into the way that language is flexible, which I think is really important for me to keep in mind. Joan Didion is also a writer that she really shaped my editorial career. I didn't think that nonfiction, when I was in college, I was such a heavy, contemporary lit, but very classic, lit major, focused on picking apart the great American novel. That was my focus. And then I took a course that was all about narrative nonfiction, and particularly in the post-World War II era, and that really shifted my perspective on what nonfiction could be. And I think that ultimately has reverberated throughout my career, just finding out that you can talk about topics culturally in a way that feels personal. She is just a master of doing so, and just also such a gifted writer for spinning a phrase that sticks with you. She's just a literary legend, and someone that I think that really, she shaped my career as an editor, but also just my experience as a reader of that genre, and the genre that I now am able to work in, but also that I love to read. So it's gotta love Joan. She's great.
What is your advice to the aspiring editor? And also, in terms of internships, what do you think every editorial intern should be getting out of the experience as they decide that they want to make a career out of that internship, to become an editor?
I always say that publishing is an apprenticeship industry. It's the type of career path where you don't actually really know the contours of the job until you're actually in it. So internships are a great way to get that exposure and to really see what the day-to-day life of working as an editor looks like. Because again, it's not about just sitting down and moving words around the page. That's that's actually a pretty small part of the job, or it's a part of the job that's done on the weekends or after work. You are in meetings a lot as an editor. You are interfacing with agents. You're developing relationships with writers. You're working with all of those teams in-house, marketing, publicity, and sales, and subrates, and all of the departments who help create a book. And an internship gives you a bird's eye view into that. I think, so I had 3 internships. I also interned at a literary agency to kind of get a sense of what the other side of that looked like. And each internship that I had gave me a greater understanding of the industry's heartbeat. And I think that if you are interested in the publishing industry, it's really it's important to be able to secure an internship for that reason. It's a very competitive industry, and the mission, I think, of an internship should be to acquire as much knowledge as possible. I think a lot of people go into publishing thinking they want to be an editor, but sometimes that doesn't always work out. So even if if you've secured an editorial internship, I think it's important to, if you can, take the time to talk to people in other departments to find out what their jobs look like as well, just so you have a greater understanding of how the whole machine works, and see if other things, other departments may invigorate you equally, or if that kind of solidifies your interest in editorial. And again, yeah, asking questions, keeping up to speed on industry trends, and just being a reader. I think that's so important. When I was in college and I had these internships, I also worked at a Barnes & Noble, and that always kept me grounded to what readers were interested in. And I think that you have to always have that sort of guiding principle to help shape your understanding of the industry, and help you develop your own sort of editorial acumen as well.
What are your thoughts, Kate? I know I can't keep you too long, but I do have to ask, what are your thoughts on books by celebrities or public figures, and which ones do you think seem to do really well in the marketplace? Is it the memoirs? Is it the biographies or novel? You know?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the person writing it, honestly. I have worked with some figures of prominence, like celebrity-related authors, and I think what's really important to remember is that you want that person to feel like they are sitting down next to a reader, like their friends. Like there has to be a level of intimacy to the voice, and I think that's what differentiates books that feel like perhaps more content than book. I'm always like, a book should be a book. A book shouldn't just be like rehashed content or like feeling like it's a canned sort of like means to discuss a career. I think the books that work best in that category tend to be ones where the first of all, the celebrity is someone who reads. I think that's really important to keep in mind. Like having like an interest in books, I think lends itself to a better writing experience and a better reading experience. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And I do think that voice and perspective are really important. I think that the age of just like tell-alls kind of don't really, I feel like that's slightly in the past. We see a lot of like memoir and essay collections that come from people in the celebrity field, and I feel like that is working well as a category right now. But I think it also makes sense that, and I think it also is necessary to have some sort of perspective outside of like, oh, I'm just an actor doing my acting thing. Like, we want more as readers. We want commentary on culture. So I think that the books that have done really well in that space tend to be ones that have a level of commentary about where we are culturally and where this person fits into it in a way that feels appropriate to their stature. Hi, this is Kate Napolitano, and you're listening to So Booking Cool with Jewel B.
Now, earlier you did mention that the publishing industry did seem inaccessible to you. Is that a challenge that you face, you would say, in this industry that you've overcome, or has there been another challenge that you've overcome?
I do believe that was the inaccessibility of the industry did present itself to me early, and I do think it's something that as an industry we have to work towards increasingly. It should be something that should be like the norm, to be making sure that the industry feels like it is not just segmented out to a certain population. In terms of like where I am now in my career, I'm in it, so I feel like that's not a daily challenge for me. I'm also a straight white woman, so I feel like that makes it like I had levels of like ability to like crack through that maybe have not been as historically easy for other populations. In terms of like my actual the other challenges within my career, I would say that when I was coming up, because my taste like was a little bit like on the fringe, like you've noted, like a lot of people that I've worked with have like been on the up and up, and so that has in the past, like I when I was like an associate editor or an assistant editor, when I was really starting to build my list and sort of define my taste, I had to do a lot of the sort of like, you don't understand what this trend is, or like you don't know who this person is, but trust me, a lot of people do, and that takes a lot of stamina to be able to tell to like tell your colleagues and try to get them excited about something that they're maybe not as like keyed into culturally. And luckily I've been able to work with really supportive editorial teams that have allowed that taste to flourish and develop over time. But I think that was probably one of the biggest challenges of my career, in addition to just the workload itself can push you towards sort of the burnout that Anne Helen Peterson will be writing about in her forthcoming book. But that sort of balance of developing your own taste and seeking out writers and doing that as you're a young editor while you're also assisting requires a lot of patience, a lot of time. It's also an industry that historically has not paid very well. So I think that was always a challenge for me. coming from I have student loan debt. This is something that I feel like a lot of people in my generation are experiencing, but that's also something that you're going into an industry that has just historically, like most media industries, like doesn't pay quite as well. So when you're in those early stages and you're working all the time, it's very helpful to have a goal or a mission. And I guess my like millennials buy books and like let's get young cultural commentators shaking things up, like that has always been like my North Star guiding me through. But it was definitely something that, you know, I had to contend with and evaluate over time as I was making my way up in the industry.
Kate Napolitano, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Like, it has been such a pleasure. I'm so glad that we did this. I have to give a shout out to Deanne Ermy, who also works at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, because she pointed me in the direction of you, Kate, which I'm like so pleased about.
Thanks, Deanne. She's great.
Yeah, seems like it. And I can tell that you are as well. So, yeah, thank you for taking the time, and I hope that you are feeling better. You know, thanks for rescheduling and all that.
Of course, yeah, thank you. I feel like my voice might have like Kathleen Turner vibes right now, but it was very, very scratchy last week. It would not have been a very pleasant podcast experience for anyone.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Like, no, your voice sounds great. So excited about the upcoming projects that you're going to be having, such as Can't Even and, you know, the Cazzie David book, you know, all of it, of what's to come. Can you reveal when we can expect to get these books in our hands or on our screens on the Kindle?
So since I changed publishers, so I started at Houghton Mifflin in November 2017. So as I said, books long burn process. So the first books that I will be publishing out in my new home will be this fall. It kicks off with two books that are in the pop culture space. One is from the hardtimes.net, which is basically the Onion, but for the punk and hardcore community, which is a total passion project. Such sharp humor writing. And then the other project is it's based on an Instagram account called Every Outfit on Sex in the City. The book is called We Should All Be Mirandas. It is a celebration of the character that everyone had forever kind of tossed to the side as like not likable. Well, now we're in an era where like women who have an opinion and are cashing paychecks are ones that we should be valuing. So I'm really excited about that book as well. I think that those two are really great fun, exciting projects to kick off my HMH publication schedule with many, many more to come.
Yes, many, many more to come, and we'll be tuned in.
Thank you.
Of course, and thank you so much to all the listeners, and until next time, so booking cool.